History remembers pirates as legends, adventurers of the sea, men chasing gold and glory. But there was another side, one far darker, because what the Barbary pirates did to their captives wasn't adventure, it was terror. Imagine this, you're sailing across the Mediterranean, the wind calm, the sea quiet, and then black sails appear on the horizon. Within minutes, your ship is surrounded, weapons drawn, no escape. And just like that, your life is no longer yours. Because for thousands of captives, this wasn't the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, Barbary pirates operated along the North African coast. They didn't just target ships. They raided coastal towns, kidnapped entire families, and disappeared back into the sea before help could arrive. Men, women, even children, no one was safe. Some estimates suggest that over 1 million Europeans were captured over centuries, taken far from home, sold into slavery, or held for ransom. But what made this even more terrifying was the uncertainty. You didn't know if you'd be sold, forced to work, or ever see your family again. For many, hope faded quickly, because once you were taken, you entered a world where survival itself became a daily struggle. And what awaited captives was far worse than they could have imagined. The attack itself was only the beginning. Once the pirates took control, everything changed in seconds. Passengers were dragged from hiding. Crew members were beaten into submission. Anyone who resisted faced immediate violence. The strongest men were separated first, examined like property, their value already being decided. Women and children were pulled aside, terrified, confused, clinging to one another. Families were broken apart instantly. No time for goodbyes, no chance to resist. Because to the pirates, these weren't people. They were cargo. Bound with ropes or chains, captives were forced below deck. Dark, cramped spaces with barely any air. The smell of sweat, fear, and seawater filled the hold. Cries echoed in the darkness. Days, sometimes weeks, passed like this. Little food, almost no water. No idea where they were being taken. Some captives didn't survive the journey, their bodies thrown into the sea without a second thought. For those who did survive, a new fear began to grow, because the real horror wasn't the ship. It was what waited at the shore. As the ships approached North Africa, cities like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli came into view. To the pirates, these were safe havens. To the captives, they were the gates to a completely unknown fate. Because once they stepped onto land, they would be bought, sold, or broken, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The moment they reached land, the true horror began. Captives were marched through crowded streets, their hands bound, their faces filled with fear. Locals gathered to watch, some curious, some indifferent, because this was normal. This was business. They were taken to slave markets, open spaces where human lives were traded like goods. Men were forced to stand in lines, their muscles inspected, their strength judged. Buyers checked their teeth, their hands, even their scars, not as people, but as investments. Women and children faced a different kind of scrutiny, separated again, examined closely, whispers exchanged between buyers. Families that had survived the journey together were torn apart in seconds. A mother pulled away from her child, a husband unable to reach his wife. Their cries filled the market, but no one stopped it, because once you entered the market, you no longer belonged to yourself. You belonged to whoever could pay. Some captives were purchased by wealthy households. Others were taken to work in harsh labor, construction, rowing ships, or heavy manual work. And some simply disappeared into lives no one would ever document. Names forgotten, identities erased. For many, this was the moment hope truly died. Because even if you survived, you were no longer who you once were. You had become something else, something owned. And what came next would test even the strongest will to survive. For those who were sold, life didn't get easier. It got harder, much harder. Every captive faced a different fate, but almost all of them shared one thing. They had no control over their lives anymore. Many men were sent to the galleys, large ships powered by human rowing, chained to wooden benches, forced to row for hours, sometimes days, under the burning sun, with barely any rest. If they slowed down, they were beaten. If they collapsed, they were replaced, because to their captors, they were expendable. Others were forced into brutal labor, building walls, carrying heavy stone, working in harsh conditions with little food or water. Every day was survival. Every moment was exhaustion. For women, the experience was different, but no less terrifying. They were taken into households, their freedom completely stripped away, forced to serve, to obey, to live under constant control. And for many captives, the hardest part wasn't the labor. It was the uncertainty, not knowing if they would ever go home, not knowing if their families were alive, not knowing if anyone even knew they were gone. Some held onto hope, praying for ransom, rescue, or escape. And sometimes, that hope wasn't impossible, because a few captives were eventually freed. But for most, years passed, and hope slowly faded into acceptance. A life once full of freedom, reduced to survival under someone else's rule. For many captives, there was no dramatic rescue, no heroic return home, just silence. Years turned into decades. Names were forgotten, stories erased. Some were eventually ransomed, families or governments paying for their freedom, a rare second chance. But even then, they returned as different people, changed by what they had seen, what they had endured, because captivity didn't just take their freedom, took their identity. Others were never freed. They lived out their lives in a foreign land, far from everything they once knew. Their languages faded. Their past became a distant memory, and slowly, they disappeared from history. But the impact of these events didn't vanish. Entire coastal regions in Europe lived in fear. Villages were abandoned. Watchtowers were built along shores, because at any moment, the sails could appear again. This wasn't just piracy. It was a system, a trade built on human suffering, a chapter of history many people never learn about. And that's what makes it so powerful, because behind every number was a person, a life interrupted, family broken, a story unfinished. So when we think about pirates, it's easy to imagine adventure, but the truth is far darker. For thousands of captives, the sea didn't bring freedom, it brought chains. And for many, that was a fate worse than death.